First off, thank you very much for bringing us here to BikeArlington in Arlington County, for inviting us to come, not only to make the films, but to speak to you about Vancouver and what it's been like for us and the changes in the city over time.
Yeah, as Henry mentioned, we've been racing around Arlington the last few days, trying to get everything on camera. The people have been so welcoming, so hospitable. They've just been absolutely fantastic. We haven't been able to take out our map without someone stopping to ask us if we needed help with directions. So that's been most appreciated. We actually have two of our stars in the room, Edgar and Jillian in the back there, and it's great to see them again after putting them through the ringer for several hours earlier this week. So we'll get started here. So Melissa and I have spent the last few years, as Henry mentioned, experiencing the changes in bike culture in Vancouver. And that's been through cycling in the city, both on our own, to work, to dates, but also as a family. We have two small children who are now 6 and 8. We've seen a lot of positive change, and that's because the city's done better than most in North America to recognize the need for better bike infrastructure. And that's come out of a specific shift in strategy 7 years ago that's helped foster that change. So this afternoon we are going to present to you where Vancouver started from and how conditions have improved to make cycling more accessible to the average person.
So as Chris mentioned, on a personal level, we have small children. Well, they're not so small anymore. They keep growing. That's what they do. But the changes that have happened in the city have really allowed us to maintain our mobility despite the fact that we don't have a private automobile anymore. And it was, as Henry mentioned, because of the interest in what we were doing that we started sharing our stories in writing and in photography. Myself with the blogging, Chris with the Vancouver Chic, and then the following films. And we've then come together to create Modacity and focus on presenting the freedom and simplicity of a multimodal lifestyle. So 7 years ago, this is what Vancouver looked like. The streets were filled with more aggressive cyclists in sort of dangerous and prohibitive situations, very close to automobiles or riding with the bulls, as we put it. And cycling was really only for the fit and the brave, or that was the perception at least. So anyone that was sort of hesitant was less likely to get out on a bike, and for the most part the riders were men. So a lot less women and children being seen on the streets.
So most areas of the city didn't have accessible bike infrastructure. It was mostly door zone, paint, and sharrows. We've seen plenty of that in Arlington over the last few days. And they've all been back streets. So these are bike routes that encourage longer distance trips on bikes built for speed. They kept the cyclists out of sight and out of mind for those that were driving around the city. And as a result, the bike culture became very homogenous. Everyone seemed decked out in the cycling uniform, which you see up on the screen there, and that was worn by the majority of cyclists on the road. So in 2008, a lot of that changed, and we had elected a young progressive mayor named Robertson, and part of his platform was to improve the conditions on the ground for cycling. He himself would be considered one of the old guard. He actually rode a bike, but he recognized that he was an anomaly and that 95% of Vancouverites didn't. So they were dedicated to creating infrastructure for that interested but concerned category of people that would love to try it, but feel that it's too dangerous or prohibitive or complicated. The main focus of that was on physically separated bikeways on more arterial, busy, well-used streets.
So in the city of Vancouver, they've been spending the last 7 years or so to build these new lanes and provide a connection. So not just one lane going nowhere, but they're all being built into a grid. And they've spent a lot of political capital doing that. So they come up against opposition with every new bike lane. But proof is in the pudding, I guess, because Gregor was just reelected for a third term. So, and they continue with that clear mandate of looking ahead to make Vancouver the greenest city by 2020, where 50% of all trips are made by either foot, bicycle, or transit. And actually, I don't know if if it made it out here, but news was in the city that they just met that goal. So right now, people transporting, or so yeah, transit, walking, cycling, scooting, however, are now making up at least half the trips in the city.
So we'll run quickly through the 6 projects that were executed over the last 6 years and give you a sense of each one, the history and the backstory behind it. The first one is the Burrard Bridge, which was basically started as soon as Gregor was elected. The bridge itself is over 80 years old and a historic structure, but it's also a critical link to the downtown peninsula, which is actually surrounded on 3 sides by the Pacific Ocean. Prior to the installation of this protected bike lane, the cyclists simply shared the sidewalk with a narrow sidewalk with pedestrians, and paired with 6 lanes of cars that were moving in speeds of up to 60, 70 kilometers an hour. It created rather dangerous and rather unpleasant conditions. So what they ended up doing was taking out 1 lane of automobile traffic. They dedicated that to cyclists moving in one direction, and then the sidewalk going the other direction, they put up a barrier, and there was a one-way cycle track going in the other direction. And it was a resounding success basically as soon as it was installed, and bike traffic just seems to grow and grow every single year.
The second section that went up would be the Dunsmuir Viaduct and Downtown Portal. So the Dunsmuir Viaduct itself is a remnant of a failed attempt to put a highway through the city of Vancouver. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. They had a plan to extend the major highway that passes on the outside of the city straight through, cutting through Stanley Park as well, which is one of our beautiful landmarks in Vancouver. And what happened is the neighborhood group fought fervently, and what we were left with is about 500 meters or so, 1.6 kilometers is what it's saying up there, of elevated roadway. The section that they ended up closing off in around 2010, around the Olympics, was already being closed off for construction of the many condos that were being built in downtown. And so they just kept that lane shut and turned it into a dual direction cycle track. And then once you get into the downtown peninsula, they continue to separate it, which is that picture on the right there with bollards, and you'll see there's some nice greenery. And so what it does is it actually provides the vital connection from East Vancouver all the way into downtown. It also links up with 2 SkyTrain stations, bus stops, so it provides that multimodal connection, so people that are going further in their travels can bike to a point, hop on the train, and keep going.
So the third project we'll talk about, and this was installed after Dunsmuir, was the Hornby Street. So it was a north-south connection through the center of the downtown peninsula. It ran perpendicular to the Dunsmuir Street route, and it connected the Burrard Bridge, which was the first project we spoke about, with the convention center downtown, the north waterfront, the law courts, Robertson Square, the art gallery, and countless hotels, cafes, and businesses all along that route. It's a 2-way cycle track running parallel to a 1-way street, so the cars are moving in one direction. The physically separated cyclists are moving both directions. And the city removed 150 on-street parking spaces to create that space, but they were every single parking spot was reallocated to side streets and parking garages, so they did a net inventory of parking spaces within a 5-minute walk of that route, and every single parking space they removed, they replaced somewhere else. So there was no net loss in on-street parking. The fourth route was the Comox Street Greenway. It's a 2-kilometer neighborhood greenway for walking and cycling through the city's densest neighborhood, which is the West End. It runs east-west from the Hornby Street route, which was the last one, right into Stanley Park, and there's all kinds of beautiful recreational cycling that starts in Stanley Park. And it was a result of an extensive public consultation process. They had dozens of open houses in the neighborhood and engaged with hundreds of citizens to get their feedback on the proposed route and what exactly they would do. So it's a combination of traffic calmed, shared space bikeway, and then a fully separated cycle track, as you can see on the picture on the right.
And the fifth project that was completed probably about 1.5 years, 2 years ago now, was the Union Street separated and shared space. So this route here actually is one of the busiest routes in Vancouver. You've got a lot of people commuting from East Vancouver, which is sort of one of our bedroom communities, traveling into the downtown area for work and various other activities. The reason that this was actually turned into separated space was because the traffic along here, the city deemed was at basically a tipping point. It was unsafe now for cyclists and motorists to be sharing this space, and so that was what was then the instigator for separating. It removed actually a limited number of on-street parking. There are businesses on that bottom photo adjacent to the lane, and what it just meant was taking out some spaces on the opposite side of the street, but had very little impact to the overall parking in the area. And it's become actually our main way of getting into the downtown area now, so it's been a good success for us.
And then the sixth and final project we'll talk about is the Point Grey Greenway. And this actually formally completed the Seaside Greenway, which is the seawall. We call it the gem of Vancouver. So you can basically walk, cycle, rollerblade for 30 kilometers, completely separated from cars, with the ocean on one side and the mountains right there, and the ships and the boats. It's absolutely stunning. And this provided the last little connection from what was Kitts Beach out to Jericho Beach. Point Grey Road itself was previously a two-lane road with very narrow sidewalks and no safe space for cycling. We ourselves would never dream of attempting to ride that stretch with or without children, but it opened access to all those beaches and improved conditions on the ground, not just for cyclists, but for people who are using that neighborhood to walk their dog, to take a jog, and all the parks that are along there, along the water.
So we've shown you a lot of infrastructure, but infrastructure really isn't enough to really improve the cycling numbers. What has to go with that is also bike-friendly policy to help encourage the bike curious. So the key one, especially on our greenways, is the lowering of speed limits. So all of our bikeways or greenways have a speed limit of 30 kilometers, which is in miles, I'm not good at conversion,
20.
About 20 miles.
15? 15?
18? And so they're reduced to that speed because the likelihood of serious injury goes down as you start dropping the speeds. And so because there's a high volume of cyclists, but these are still residential areas where people live and need to get to and from, that helps to mitigate any serious damage. Also we have, which you guys have here, the bike buses. So at any time you can see two bikes, most of the time you can see two bikes on most of the buses getting from one end of the city to the other. And it also helps to really promote that multimodal trip and provide that connection throughout the Metro Vancouver area. So these, for us, our TransLink, it doesn't just affect Vancouver, it's our whole region. And so people will be getting from out in the suburbs into the city and have that as the opportunity to bring their bike along with them. But you also need adequate space for bikes on public transit, so we've got that on our Sky trains, not during rush hour, sadly, but that's okay, we'll get there. And again, providing that connection for longer trips.
So policy is one side where we found in Vancouver hasn't kept up with the infrastructure and the growing numbers. So while we've made great strides as a cycling city, we'll be the first to admit there's still work to be done to cater for that growth. The biggest thing is bike parking, and especially for our family of four, we end up, as you can see in the bottom left there, locking our bikes to a tree because the racks themselves are full and the businesses have no real incentive, or the city doesn't have the policies in place to encourage them to build bike parking or corrals as they do in cities like Portland. And then there are rules and regulations around cycling that are still quite outdated. So bicycling falls under the Motor Vehicle Act in BC, which in and of itself is a bit of a misnomer, but it outlaws all kinds of silly little behavior like riding on the back rack or riding abreast, so to a side, is technically against the law. And these are all activities that we're now seeing growing as the bike culture grows, rather innocuous things. But the police can use them from time to time to crack down on what are essentially silly little activities that people get up to. So although, each of these projects has been a positive change for the city, it hasn't been in the face of vocal opposition or what has been coined as bike lash. So we categorize it in 4 different areas, and that's business owners worry about the loss of revenue due to either removed parking or relocated on-street parking. There's also that speculation that the reallocation of road space will increase congestion. And there's certain taxpayer groups that pop up that say, well, bike lanes are just too expensive and they're underutilized, so they're not worth the expense. And then finally, there's this misconception that you are enabling a group of lawbreakers, and all they do is ride on the sidewalk and roll through stop signs, and so we shouldn't be building this infrastructure to cater to those people.
But as we've mentioned, each of the new infrastructure provided a success for both ridership and also for safety. So that interested but concerned group are now making up the bulk of our increased ridership. And it's an encouraging note because it's proving the city is on the right track by providing these capabilities to the citizens. And keeping in mind that opposition, the numbers, as I said, are coming out of the city are debunking that. So as I said, half of the riders are now not taking personal automobiles. They're finding alternate means of getting around. The impact on driving time, which is often the biggest concern regarding congestion, has been minimal, with an average of maybe 1 to 2 extra minutes at the absolute most. Collisions have dramatically decreased throughout the city. And there's also better signage and education for both drivers and cyclists, and sidewalk cycling, which was one of the complaints when it comes to scofflaw cyclists, is all but disappeared where these separated tracks have opened up. But most importantly, the number of women and children now riding throughout downtown and out to Point Grey has seen a distinct spike. It's an indication that with the improved changes, the separation, cyclists feel safer and they're more comfortable riding, even with their most vulnerable people and their families. So the quantitative results prove that opposition and worry are unfounded, and all of this has helped to really improve the overall quality of our city and its people.
Okay, so that was really the nuts and bolts side of our talk, and we're really more interested in the more qualitative human side. So as Henry mentioned, we've done a lot of blogging and a lot of photo blogging and a lot of filmmaking to tell those stories that have come out of how that better infrastructure has led to a different demographic of people riding bikes. So we'll talk a little bit about that now. Ultimately, it's led to a slower, simpler, more civilized bike culture. But perhaps more importantly, it's made biking more accessible and more diverse. It's also taken the act of getting on a bike off of the back streets and put it front and center in the city's consciousness. So in our work for Velo Family Diaries, Vancouver, Cyclists, Chic, and Modacity, we'll run through the specific changes we've seen on the city streets.
So with the adoption of the slower, simpler cycling in Vancouver, we're seeing a revitalization of the classic upright or Dutch-style bicycle. These bikes are built for utility rather than speed and make activities like running errands, grocery shopping, heading out with the kids for taking them to school and back a little easier. Upright bicycles are overall easier to ride. They're a little more appealing to the bike curious as they're a little less sporty. There's not this perception that they need to be super fit to ride them. And it makes getting around the city a little more comfortable. An added bonus is that sitting upright also allows them to feel more connected to their surroundings. So myself and Chris, we both ride upright bikes, and it's not uncommon to be riding along and touching grass as we pass or holding hands with our kids, and we just feel more comfortable and it's a little easier to do that. Also, these upright bikes provide the simplicity and the complete bicycle. So you buy that bike and it's usually fully equipped with your fenders, lights, chain guards, bells, skirt guards if that's what you're looking for. And it just makes it easy to get your bike and go without having to worry about extra gear and what else you need to have on that bike as you go.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the homogeneous nature of the cycling uniform, we're seeing things changing significantly in Vancouver. And there's been a shift in attitude from a running with wheels to simply walking with wheels. The bicycle becomes an extension of walking or public transit, and as such, cycle-specific clothing has become redundant for the most part, and more and more people are dressing for the destination. So as a result, cycling has become more appealing to a much broader audience, to the 99%, if you will. And it's through imagery, as you see on the screen, that we've presented through Vancouver Cycle Chic and our blogging, that makes that interested but concerned crowd see images like that and think, hey, I can do that. That's easy. Helmets. Okay, so we'll touch on this briefly. It's a subject that we generally avoid, as we find it a distraction from the more important conversations we need to have around infrastructure. But there's something really interesting happening in Vancouver that we feel compelled to share as a result of safe, separated infrastructure being built. The province that we live in actually has a mandatory helmet law for adults. So this was passed in the 1990s when all that existed was fast cycling and little to no infrastructure. Everyone was leaning forward, racing fast, and as a result, the province passed a law that said everybody has to wear a helmet for every trip, no matter the distance, speed, or bike. But with every new bike lane that's being built, there are few people riding with helmets. Melissa and I actually started wearing ours a couple years ago, and that just because we felt safe. We were riding upright, we were riding physically separated from traffic, and helmets began to feel a little bit unnecessary and a little bit redundant. So as a result, this law, which is on the books, but has basically become unenforceable by the police. The last count, it was about 60% helmet usage in Vancouver, and it seems to be dropping every year. But the only thing it's really accomplished is blocking the bike share scheme that we've been studying for
10 years.
Almost 10 years now. Helmets themselves make bike share basically unworkable, and every provider that we've approached have basically balked at the idea, and we've got all this great infrastructure and no bike share to speak of, unfortunately.
So kudos to you guys. Your bike share is awesome. So with the increase of proper infrastructure, we're also starting to see that increase in female cyclists on the road. As a generally more risk-averse gender, women are usually a little less likely to ride with the bulls along fast-moving traffic. But now that we're providing this safer, slower speeds and areas to do so, we're seeing an increase in female riders that now find that it's safer and more welcoming to ride around the city. So when provided with the proper infrastructure, multi-purpose trips are also facilitated. Things like going to the grocery store, meet up with friends, pick up children, shopping, etc. are a lot easier with this separated and slower spaces to ride. And it makes it less likely for them to choose to drive to those destinations. For mothers like myself, I now feel comfortable. Sorry, I'm covering the mic. I feel more comfortable riding my bike with my children to these different places, and I'm encouraged to bring my children with me, whereas driving into downtown or riding into downtown prior to the Dunbar Viaduct and Hornby Street were something that I just didn't do with the kids. And so, we're now seeing we're riding more, we're healthier, and we're happier together doing so. And with more parents riding, more adults comfortable riding on these streets, we're also seeing a lot of children starting to ride on their own, which is a fantastic result of new infrastructure. Schools throughout Vancouver are encouraging children to ride to school through Safe Routes to School programs, biking to school events. So we have our Bike to Work Week is the end of May, and it also coincides with Bike to School Week. So we have the same initiative to promote cycling amongst the schools. And then in October, there's also I Walk and I Bike Week that we participate in to encourage those numbers for children. And the benefits are really significant for children riding, and not only for their health, but it also has a very positive impact on their in-school learning. So riding or walking to school has been shown to increase receptiveness in the classroom, focus for what they're learning, and even a better temperament while they're in the class. In terms of infrastructure, it's also helped to facilitate multi-purpose trips again. So getting the kids to and from school, to their activities, to friends, is a lot easier. And it also encourages more time spent as a family, whether it's on a short trip the park or a long trip along the water, more and more families are filling up the seawall every weekend, which is fantastic and really improves an overall family lifestyle.
Cargo bikes. So this is one of the more interesting and exciting things that we've seen crop up, and that's with the number of families riding in the city. We're also seeing an increase in cargo bikes. Many young families we know have opted to invest in a cargo bike. We just got ours before Christmas, and it's really an amazing machine, and it's become our new pickup truck. So in addition to children, they've also helped transport other things like groceries, large purchases, even pets. And we're also seeing businesses using cargo bikes for deliveries from anything from food to freight. The gentleman in the top left there, Philip, he's an appliance repairman, and he does it all by cargo bike, which is pretty awesome. We're also seeing politicians. The gentleman in the top right, David Eby, he's a member of legislature, and he created a custom cargo bike mobile constituency office. So he travels around his riding and uses this bike to connect with his constituents. So he sets up at special events and chats with the people that he represents. And this has all become, this is all a result of friendlier streets on which to navigate. You wouldn't see these bikes, racing down the middle of Hastings before, it was safer to ride.
To give some context, Hastings is sort of like a little mini highway. It's a 6-lane road in our city.
So we'll present the first of our films that we're going to show this afternoon. One of the Cycle Chic films who features our friend Simon, who uses his cargo bike to transport his son Tig, as well as art supplies. He's a visual artist, and we made a short film about him.
Inspiration for my creative process is everything. It's from the point of waking up to the point of going to sleep. You're constantly looking and taking in visuals, and that's what inspires me. It's just everything inspires me. Just cycling around, walking around, and absorbing. You use the tools you have at hand, and a bike plays in that collection of creative impulses or visuals. With cycling, what is great about that is I can be cycling down the road and if something catches my eye, whether it's a window on an apartment or some garbage that's been left behind in an alleyway, I can just pull over. It also sort of creeps into the work every once in a while as well. Bikes pop up into the paintings or the photos every once in a while. We brought our cargo bike over from Ireland. We had purchased it over there after seeing them in the Netherlands. We liked it better than the tow system because my son Tig is up front and we can see what he's doing and we don't have to take our eyes off the road. My favorite places in Vancouver to get to on a bike has to be just the neighborhoods and the alleyways. I love exploring with my son, and the back alleyways offer a great experience of Vancouver that is unique to here, I feel. People don't often see this three-wheel bike, and people are no different here than they were over in Ireland in that they will stop you to ask you questions about it. And so it's nice because it breaks up your day and you have these conversations with perfect strangers and they're just enthralled or they want to get one so they can bring their kid around. It's a nice occurrence that happens. My name is Simon Fleming. Recently moved to Vancouver from Galway, Ireland with my wife Nina and my son Tig. I'm a visual artist working in a variety of mediums from painting to photography to installation and sculpture.
Okay, I'll just mention one last thing on the cargo bike situation is that we've seen so many on the streets that we decided to plan our own cargo bike championship. So actually the week after we get back on
The 29th. Yeah.
On the Friday, we put the call out and we've had 24 cargo bike users respond, and we're going to take them around a course and just demonstrate to a crowd what these bikes are capable of and hopefully have some fun doing it. So we're pretty excited about that.
So Another way that the bike is becoming a great equalizer in Vancouver is we're also seeing a larger number of older people riding bikes, or the elderly. And it's proving that these cycle tracks are for all ages and abilities, which is the goal for the city of Vancouver. Those with physical limitations like chronic pain and illness find biking easier than walking, so it's helping to facilitate and maintain their control over their own mobility and also their overall sense of health and well-being. Types of bicycles for many cyclists, including myself, have as I mentioned, began switching to upright bikes because there's a less strain experienced on joints like wrists and backs as you're riding along, as opposed to when you're in a more forward-leaning position. And because they're more comfortable, they feel a little more empowered to ride more often. So we've got Cecily, who's you'll see in the next film. She suffers from chronic arthritis, and so her bike is one of the main means for her to get around for longer distances. And the photo just below, it's something unique that we've just discovered in the last year or so, is...
May I have your attention, please? Mr. Daniel Nassib, please come to the children's desk on the first floor. Thank you.
Is Daniel in the room? No? So that bottom photo, that bike is called a duet bike, and it was brought in by Yaletown House, which is one of our long-term care facilities. And what it is doing is providing the elderly that stay at this home a means to get around the seawall, even though they are no longer able to do that themselves. So it's a volunteer effort. The gentleman riding the actual bike is not paid to do so, and he comes in every day, finds out who wants to go for a ride, and will take them on a ride around the seawall to experience nature and be a part, still feel a part of the community. Chris had the pleasure of following them around about a month or two ago, and it's amazing that people will just stop and you see this intergenerational conversation happening because you've got this person that's, I think the gentleman in the picture is, what, 90? Yes. And he's having a conversation with a young child, fascinated not just with the bike, but the fact that he's getting this lovely ride around the seawall, wanting to know how he gets one of those as well. So as I mentioned, the next film we're going to show is of Cecily, and she's one of our favorites. She's a very endearing woman, very lovely, and here's her story.
I like to say that I have the best front yard in Vancouver. It has a heart and a soul that feels very organic. It just feels like the neighborhood is growing with me. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I have the best commute that I can think of. I go around the seawall. I get to see birds. I get to see runners and joggers and people with their dogs. I get to see natural beauty and the interesting shape of the man-made beauty that's taking on Vancouver. We've come so far just in the last few years that I've been riding. Again, it's just potential. And when you're in a place of potential, you can go anywhere. And so it's a really, really exciting place to be. It puts the city on a human level for me. And it just makes me feel like I'm a part of the city instead of feeling apart from the city. I don't really ride with destinations in mind. I'm just going out with an idea of what I want to see, what sort of people I want to see, what kind of scenery I want to see, and then I just sort of point my bike in a direction and sort of let fate direct me to wherever it is I'm going to go. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and as a result, I suffer from near chronic pain, not debilitating, sometimes it is, but as long as I can still wear high heels, I'm okay. And as long as I can keep riding my bike, I'm good. I worked at corporations my first few years out of library school, and then I decided to come to work in public libraries, and I love it. This is where I belong. It's a great place to come and people watch, and stuff is free. Well, I mean, your taxes are paying for it, but you can find things that you probably wouldn't ordinarily find anywhere else. It's just a great place. It's kind of pinko commie, the public library, but I'm kind of pinko commie, so it fits perfectly. My name is Cecily Walker. I live in the Olympic Village, and I'm a librarian in Vancouver.
And it's not just children that people feel safe riding with now in Vancouver. We're seeing more and more people riding with their pets as well. So whether riding in a front or rear basket or alongside the bike, walking the dog has become a joy rather than a chore. Overall, this further establishes a more casual approach to cycling and making it more everyday activity. And it's a much more practical way to transport your pet, like our friend Amy, who rides with her dog because he's not allowed on the public transport system.
Winston likes to sleep in, and so I have to wake him up in the morning to get him his breakfast.
Winston, are you hungry? Come on.
After that, he just waits patiently until I'm ready to leave and take him out. It's so nice to have another being there that appreciates you and values you. There's just this bond that you don't have with anyone else. Winston has arthritis in his elbow, and as a result he walks with a limp, and so he needs to have some easier forms of transport. People love having pets. They give them health benefits, companionship, a reason to go outside, a reason to feel alive, and I'm lucky that I get to work to make sure that happens in a context that's great for animals too. Working at the SPCA has its perks. We all get to bring our pets into work. Winston really enjoys being in the office, and he actually makes my workplace a happier place for my colleagues. I feel very lucky because I get to live my dream life. My name is Amy. My dog's name is Winston, and I work to make change for animals.
So while the bike is obviously a very important transportation tool, it's also becoming an excellent tool for sociability and staying connected with the people in the city. Over the years, we've been very privileged to take part in countless organized rides and spontaneous group rides, all focused on the simplicity of enjoying a ride in the city on two wheels. Various groups have begun cropping up, not related to advocacy, just groups that like to ride together, and they'll host monthly theme rides. We have a group that we get together with that go on vintage bike rides or solstice rides, which is always a lot of fun. And that would be, the solstices are the ride up at the top there, where we just ride along the water and enjoy the sunset for the longest day.
One of the most amazing things that's popped up in Vancouver in recent years has been the bike rave. And it's really just grown from this, it was basically, a couple dozen people getting together in the evening, lighting up their bikes and playing some music and going for a bike ride. And every year it's grown exponentially through word of mouth. And last year we had over 7,000 people come out for a night ride. So there's all kinds of LED lights, glow sticks, music, dancing, costumes, all kinds of crazy contraptions, tricycles, quadricles, rickshaws, you name it. And it's really become like this annual celebration of cycling. But the bikes themselves become an afterthought. It's more a community gathering. And it's encouraged a lot of people who wouldn't normally ride a bike to get back in the saddle and join in the fun. People we know of, who never ride, do what they can to beg, steal, or borrow a bicycle, and just for that one night of the year, so they can participate. And it's really amazing to see it grow. And I know it's spread to cities like Melbourne, Australia, Auckland, New Zealand, where we were recently. Just had their first bike rave, and they had over 1,000 people come out. So it's this cool little kind of Trojan horse that seems to be spreading around the world, and getting people on bikes, which in our mind is only a great thing.
So, bikes and business. Of course, in general, bikes have also been very good for business in Vancouver. We've seen a number of them pop up on bike routes that were once worried about loss of sales in those neighborhoods due to the parking concerns or congestion. But the ones that have stuck around have seen a boom in business over the years. The picture on the left of the screen is actually a restaurateur in East Vancouver that set up on the Union Bikeway. Well, he was there prior to the Bikeway, sorry. And he went to City Hall when he heard about the proposal and was touting that the separated lane was essentially going to cut him off at the knees financially. 1 year later, he was actually quoted in our local paper saying that business was better than ever, largely in part due to the number of citizens that were passing, but also the number of tourists that now felt safe traveling through that area. Where that is located is in our Chinatown, and so it's a very common tourist destination. So bikes have done him quite well. Businesses are even pushing for that increased bike parking that Chris was mentioning earlier to encourage cyclists to stop and spend their money locally. A lot of our craft beer market, I'm not sure if you've heard what's happening over in the West, but craft beer is booming. And a lot of those will end up setting up shop along those bike routes to draw that customer in. And it's worked out quite well for them. There seems to be a new one every month at this point. And they're really catering to those people that are either coming home and looking for a place to socialize on the way home from work or have a quick drink before heading into downtown for the night.
So with all these changes that we've seen in recent years, Vancouver is really establishing itself as a world-class cycling tourism destination. We're seeing tourists from around the world now flock to our city to experience it on two wheels. Some hotels and other businesses are beginning to recognize this and provide complimentary bike rentals, maps, and in the case of the Fairmont Pacific Rim, a bike butler who is in the lobby year-round to answer the questions, set up with people with rental bikes, maps, and directions. We're also seeing a rise in curated themed bike tours, such as the one in the following short film about our friend Josh, who runs a company called Cycle City Tours.
Just a note about his business, we've seen that grow over the last year as well. Prior to this year, he was working out of other people's rental shops and offering these guided tours, and he's seen such an interest that he now has his own bike shop where he rents out and then has the tours as well. So it's really helped him build up his business, having all these extra added bonuses of being in Vancouver.
Having a sense of wonder about the world and about everything around you and wanting to know more and find out the stories behind those things makes for a good tour guide. I studied finance and marketing in business school, and not wanting to work an office job, I decided to travel, and my travels took me all over the world. And in Japan, living in a small village, I fell in love with exploring my rural community by bicycle. Cycle City Tours was founded with the intent of telling stories about the city by bicycle. When it started, it was just myself, and we now have 8 guides touring groups around town. It's the content that shapes the foundation of a good tour, but it's the personal interaction, it's the informal chatting between the stops that allows for a unique experience. That personal connection is a much stronger memory than just seeing a site. I love what's happening right now with neighborhood establishments that are opening up. There's a great feeling when you go into a place that you know is locally owned. You know the people who work there live in the neighborhood. There's a great connection and a sense of place that you feel when you go into a place like that. A lot of people will tell you that running your own business is a lot like having a child. Your state of happiness or sadness or well-being is very much attached to this thing that you've helped to create. Well, I think what we're doing is we're telling stories. That's really the essence of what being a guide is, and that's what people are paying for when they join a guided tour. Just knowing that you've had an impact on somebody's experience, there's an intrinsic sense of happiness that comes through. It's a great feeling. My name is Josh. I'm the founder of Cycle City Tours. I tell stories by bicycle.
All right. So the important thing to remember in all of the images that you saw here is that most of the people that you've seen probably weren't riding a bike 6 years ago, ourselves included, and would never identify themselves as cyclists. Rather, they're just citizens of a multimodal city that are combining walking, transit, cycling, and automobiles, and the investment in the infrastructure has really enabled all of that. And it's what keeps families like ours in Vancouver, because the city remains affordable and accessible to us, and the increases in our quality of life and happiness have been exponential.
So yeah, we'll be the first to admit that the 4 people on the screen at the moment wouldn't be riding bikes without that crucial shift in strategy in 2008 and the election of Mayor Gregor Robertson. And from what we've seen here in Arlington, the county sits at a turning point when it comes to building separated cycleways. You have a beautiful trail network, but the on-street cycling facilities, definitely, there's some room for improvement. So we hope that when we return in the coming years, with our children in tow, we're able to bring them and ride our bikes safely and comfortably, and that's up to everybody in this room to make that happen. Good luck, and thanks for having us.